Welcome to Sales for Nerds. I'm your host and chief nerd, Ruben Swartz. If you started a business because you love serving clients but realized you didn't like the sales and marketing aspect of running that business so much, this is the podcast for you. Sales and marketing doesn't have to suck. It can actually be a lot of fun. And on this show, we're going to teach you how to connect instead of network, teach instead of market, help instead of sell, so you can keep serving people even while you're building your pipeline and growing your business. Now let's get to it. Today, I'm super excited to have with me Lydia Lee, founder of Screw the Cubicle, which is just such a great name. When she got recommended as somebody who might be a great guest for Sales for Nerds, I said, well, that sounds really promising. And then we had a wonderful conversation. And here we are. Lydia is a globe-trotting consultant or coach to consultants and coaches. She helps people design a business that works for them instead of them working for the business. And I'm really excited to have her here today. Lydia, welcome to Sales for Nerds. Where on the globe are you joining us from, and what do you have in your glass?
Well, today I'm much closer to you in continents. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, which is my previous stomping grounds to where I grew up. And my home base is in Bali, which is about a whole day's worth of travel from here. So luckily we're on the same time zone, so I can be drinking with you today. But I do have a lovely probiotic kombucha in my wine glass today, which might be a little different by what you're consuming.
Well, yeah, I've got this Patroni Sangiovese, which is an
Mm,
Italian grape, but it's from Sonoma County, California. So,
gorgeous.
mm,
Cheers.
cheers. I believe this is highly probiotic.
Yes, we'll say it is today.
All right, all right. So you literally just mentioned you're based out of Bali, but you grew up in Vancouver, and part of what you did is design your business so you could run it from anywhere. Tell me about your entrepreneurial journey and how did you figure out how to set something up that gives you so much freedom?
I would love to say that I pre-planned this and everything worked out to plan, but it was sort of an accidental stumble and multiple stumbles along the way in the past 11 years of me being an entrepreneur. Originally, when I started my first business, which was not Screw the Cubicle, by the way, it was what I call a transition business from my old industry in educational consulting. I created a consulting agency, served similar clients that I used to serve back in my corporate job, actually converted my bosses into my first consulting clients. I negotiated a consultancy gig with them. And that was the first business I started. And then about 11 years ago when I started it, I'm not sure if you know about Vancouver, it's probably where you are these days as well. The lifestyle costs are quite high for someone
Hmm.
that didn't want to take out a loan for business. And I was a self-starter. I was sort of grassroots. It was sort of just like really milking my bank account, just being having to live in downtown
Hmm.
Vancouver. But I really enjoyed the lifestyle. I didn't want to kind of move back to the suburbs and get lower rent. I wanted to still continue to have a life and do the things that I enjoy. And so my family's from Malaysia originally, the best food in Southeast Asia, if I might add, if you haven't been. And I sort of wondered, what if people miss me that much if I wasn't, people weren't even coming to an office to see me. I was just on Skype calls. There was no Zoom at the time. Skype was sort of the only way to
Hmm.
call my international clients. And I thought, why don't I just test the grounds for a few months? If it sort of blows up in my face, whatever, come back to the drawing board and I'll be back where I started anyway. There's sort of nothing to lose for me. But what I really wanted to have was a bit more flexibility, a little bit more leeway in the cost of my lifestyle so that I didn't have to like take on clients I didn't want to take on just to pay
Hmm.
rent.
Hmm.
And for the first 2 years of your business, you're a little desperate, right? You're like,
Hmm.
okay, you want to pay me? Yes, I need that money. But I found myself kind of feeling the same way I felt in corporate, except this was my business, that I was really unfulfilled yet again,
Hmm.
except
Hmm.
I'm the boss and, I can't fire myself right now.
Right.
So I needed to kind of change something. And partly was the environment. And I sort of thought, what was the real reason, the real intention for me to quit a six-figure job with all the benefits and perks? And, I was actually due to be made partner to that job before I quit, which is something I really gave up. Right. But so what is the exchange here? Because it's not a sacrifice if it wasn't something I wanted anyway. So what's that new environment I'm trying to create? And so that was sort of the beta test, if you will, of 3 months that now has turned into 11 years into my life. That sort of started the ball rolling of just experimenting with whether I could run the show on the road. And then when I got to Bali, I started a blog called Screw the Cubicle, just mainly to document my transition and corporate identity crisis I was having, leaving a job, and a place I could send my friends and family when they were asking me about what the hell I was doing and if I was having a midlife crisis a little too early. It was like, just go
Hmm.
read the blog. This is sort of my story. I don't want to have to explain this over again. And then that blog turned into a big readership that now, helped me to create a better career, a more meaningful career, helping other people transition out of corporate as well.
So that all makes sense. And as someone who originally started my business with the intention of I'm going to work half the year and travel half the year, and won't this be great? And of course, I did not succeed in that. But you said you didn't want to pay to be in downtown Vancouver, but you kind of wanted to be in downtown Vancouver, but instead you went to Bali. So
Mm,
the part I missed was you said earlier you didn't want to give up that sort of fun downtown Vancouver lifestyle, but you actually went across the globe. So
right.
help me understand that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I felt the happiest I felt in my corporate job was when I was traveling.
Mm,
The idea of like learning about different cultures, meeting different people that didn't grow up the same way I grew up, language, food was a big part of pleasure for me. It sort of instigated these feelings of like, oh, life is happening around me. That was sort of different from sort of the mundane rituals I was used to. When you're somewhere for a long time with talking to the same people, having the same narrative, right? Like walking the same way to work. It's sort of that there's no sort of pattern interrupt in the way that you behave and see the world.
hmm
And so part of what I wanted to do was going, is Vancouver the only place I can call home, quote unquote, or is home wherever I kind of decide is a place that I can sort of do things that make my life happy. And part of that was having more hobbies, having more time freedom for hobbies,
hmm
not being not needing to work 40 hours a week if I can help it, right? And be able to have a balance of work and play, right? And not waiting for the vacation days to do that and for it to be integrated into my everyday life. And so part of that was seeking out a different location that, lifestyle costs could be lower. And
hmm
part of actually seeing new things is part of the experience. And even though Bali is not similar to downtown Vancouver, what it did, I love the beach, for example. Bali has a beach, so does Vancouver. Vancouver's water is a lot colder, but the beaches in Bali are more in abundance. Healthy food, right? That I really loved in Vancouver. Good friends that were, I love summer in Vancouver because people were just a lot more fancy free and footloose. A
hmm
lot more of that going on every day abroad than in the sort of first world cities. And so that sort of, I think, yeah, it sort of ticked the boxes for me for the sort of lifestyle values that I really cared about.
Okay. Now, when you went there, did you just like up and move by yourself and get an apartment, or did you have friends or family there? How did that actual geographic relocation work?
I didn't know a single soul that was doing anything I was planning to do. And originally, I was planning to do this with a partner that I was with at the time. We actually broke up about a month before we went on that plane. And I
Okay.
was about this close to canceling that ticket, going, okay, well, then the dream's over. And then I thought, no, 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 no. This is not going to be my story. I'm going to get on that plane. And I had not actually traveled for this long on my own forever, and then thinking about third world countries, you sort of get my Asian mom, definitely had a voice in my ear going, what the hell, you're going to get kidnapped and, robbed. And, you don't travel to these places by yourself. And then I sort of went into certain blogs and Facebook groups and sort of talked to people who were doing it. That helped me to kind of prepare myself about what to expect, but to be honest, I went there. Bali wasn't the first location I landed on. It was Cambodia. I was meeting my 70-year-old aunt who took care of me when I was a child and treating her to a trip with me there. And then I kind of put a post on Facebook going, I was creating my first course at the time with my friend, with a therapist here in Vancouver. And I said, is there anywhere I can go that has internet? Because Asia at
Mm,
the time, the internet was abysmal. If you were lucky to get 2 megabytes of Wi-Fi. And I said, anywhere I can go that isn't Cambodia, because this isn't working for me, but a place that I can maybe do some yoga, it's cheap to live, but also has some first world amenities, somewhere I can meet other expats or foreigners that are traveling. And someone mentioned Bali, which I'd never been to before. And then I researched kind of like internet cafes, that kind of stuff, and found a co-working space ran by two Canadians actually, who were UN workers that also needed internet and decided they
mm.
should just build a bamboo office to fill, with some aircon rooms for other expats who were also working abroad. And that's sort of how I got immersed into meeting more people that were like me. This was before digital nomad was a hashtag, and maybe Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week had just come out.
So you were
So
already ahead of that.
yeah, well, there was a very minimal amount of people. I didn't actually even meet one Canadian other than those two owners of that co-working space. And they had been, UN workers are always they're abroad, since the beginning of their career. So it was great to meet people from different walks of life that had families, that were
Mhm.
married, that were single, that were sort of, different age groups. And that really helped me to integrate comfortably, more comfortably, knowing that I wasn't alone in trying to
Mhm.
kind of figure out what this looked like for all of us to try to stay out there.
And I guess that's something that has just gotten easier in some ways, just the ability to find your tribe and get
Mm.
advice before you land, before you buy your ticket, etc. You're not just showing up with a printed map and printed guidebook and hoping the way you would have to do it a generation ago.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays there's always someone that's willing to meet up with you, whether it's in a Facebook group or meetups.com even, right? There's always a digital nomad or some sort of co-working group that's available these days. Back in the day, you sort of had to hunt and get referred to those places. And not every city in Asia, for example, had a co-working space. This
Hmm.
kind of been a new thing in the last like maybe 5 to 8 years, so it's definitely gotten a lot easier, but I also like relished the time that it was my turn that moment in time because it was still very fresh and there was less like noise around what you should do. It was sort of like we created things from the ground up. People sort of helped each other in ways that were very generous and helpful because there wasn't that many of us at the time, so
Hmm.
it almost felt like you had a bit of a chosen family when you were
Hmm.
there because you weren't close to your own families back there. So yeah, it was a time that I never got to replicate again, and luckily I have these friends still for the last decade who have continued to have this lifestyle and I can hold on to. But yeah, it's definitely a different time for how we integrate these days too.
Well, that's nice. Now, what would you say to somebody who's contemplating making a similar move today? What should they be on the lookout for? Because I think some of your advice is probably going to translate well. And as you say, some of it's going to be different just because
Mm.
it's the world is different than it was when you started this.
Absolutely. One of the great things is that the whole idea of remote work is so much more normalized these days. So you don't have to explain as much as I used to have to explain it,
Right.
to be like, still trust me. I'm not there physically with you, but I'm a real legit person. I think most people are sort of quite welcoming and inviting of working with people sort of remotely or from different countries around the world. So that's a plus. One of the things that I always suggest, even to my clients that are thinking of like, could I live elsewhere? I'm not sure. Do I want this as a base where I'm from originally and then have multiple bases, And that question is always like, well, who knows? I don't have a crystal ball, neither do you. And so I think one of the things that really helped me when I first moved abroad, because I think I would have scared myself shitless if I said, this is a permanent decision. I
Right.
think that's why we sort of don't do anything because we do feel that every choice we make is permanent when very well it isn't. And so I would say just like what's one tiny step to like dip your toe into the ocean of change, right? You don't have to move your entire life like I did. You can certainly just take a month off and explore one part of even a local community in your country
Hmm.
that you want to travel to and just see and get used to working remotely because that is a change in itself, right? To be self accountable, to manage your schedule, to have boundaries around when people can contact you or not contact you, or even to have like that support system, right? To find different ways of inspiration and that, we miss that water cooler talk,
Hmm.
in the office, even though we don't want to be at the office. We miss support and that socialization. So being able to craft that environment in a slow way, in a comfortable way, rather than like just going into a new country and then figuring it all out, from the ground up, that could be quite difficult. So doing it slowly with tiny experimentations, taking a week working from somewhere else, that will give you a much more easier way of that transition, right? Versus making these big moves where I have to sell everything that I
Right.
own and give up everything and hope to God this works for me.
Now, you said you originally intended to do this as a 3-month experiment yourself. How did that go? Was the whole time in Cambodia, or did you end up having to go to Bali before the 3 months was up?
So I spent about 3 weeks in Cambodia, and then I flew to Bali right after that on the fourth week, and then ended up staying about 3 months. Um, there were many occurrences I was apparently going to come back. One was that my apartment I shared with my brother, which was a rental property, literally the toilet exploded, and we had flooded a ground floor, flooded 2 floors of apartments, and we had forgotten to renew our insurance. My brother literally forgot to renew the house insurance. And so I had to pay cash for some of the damages and all the things you can imagine that came with that. And I was like, holy crap, all my life savings, everything that I saved up as my cushion was gone,
My
literally.
whole
And
the
no,
whole reason I left was to live more cheaply, and
that's it.
instead,
That's it.
life
I
has a
remember that.
funny way, right?
Totally. It was a moment, a huge turning point for me because the old me was like, I was sort of like, oh, I gotta go back with my tail between my legs. I gotta go get a job. This is it. This is the finisher, right? But there was a sort of I remember this very clearly, standing in the balcony in the home I was staying in Bali, and about to call my mother to be like, can you buy me a plane ticket? I just turned 30 at the time, going, I fucked up, buy me a plane ticket. I'll come back and figure it out. But something inside of me sort of went, it's not over yet for you, right? Like, what are some, if you got to go back, you can go back. But what are some ways that if you were to give yourself the next 2 to 3 weeks to figure something to just make things work out for you here for the next 30 days, what would you do to get money? What would you do to sell something? Right. And that point was actually a big turning point for me because it was the first time I looked at the situation that felt dire and allowed myself that creative muscle within me out of desperation to kind of figure out what can I do now and today without it being like a business, right? Like,
Hmm.
or another thing I have to start. And one of the things I realized from, patronizing these Facebook groups, right? Looking for help about business or living abroad was that I started to notice that people always need websites. Now, I'm not a web designer, but I certainly have done my own websites. And I had someone I was working with in the Philippines that did a great website. She was a great illustrator, but has zero capability to market herself. And I thought, what if we partnered up? And I would just be like a brand strategist, which I know how to do that. Don't know how to design websites. Well, I'm going to give it to Mary. Mary can do those websites. I'll make a really good package up for just for coaches, a 5-page site. I'm going to sell it for cheaper than what they're getting in the first world, and be able to package it this way. And I'm going to do it forever. I don't want to do this forever, but let's do that to see if we can recuperate some of those costs.
Hmm.
And in about 3 weeks, I sold about 8 websites at about $1,000 each. Not a lot to spend on a website, but a lot of money for me to be okay for the next 30 days, And so that really taught me this sort of like lesson of like, there's always something that you can do, right? And desperation does help with that, but also not to minimize a lot of the things that, even if it's not what people know you to do, what you used to do, there's resources,
Hmm.
and opportunities that you've already done that you can monetize that could help you, in a situation like that.
And people who listen to this podcast a lot know that I am all for sort of having some signature offers, the unique thing that you do that you're known for.
Yeah, me
And that's
too.
great once you're ready, right? But there are times when you don't have that yet and you need to be creative. And so I just want to highlight what you said, sort of in line with what I talk about a lot and how they don't actually contradict each other, especially when you're figuring things out and you were kind of going low and slow and suddenly you had to crank things up a little bit
Yeah.
because your toilet exploded halfway around the world,
Yes.
as often happens.
Literally and figuratively, right?
So hopefully you're one of the few people that has this happen literally, but I'm guessing we may hear some stories of people who actually have it happen to them as well. So you get through this and then what?
So then I decided that, it sort of gave me this interesting courage that, like, oh, I can help myself at times like this, because that would have been the worst thing that would have happened to me, that I think the old me would have gone, yeah, it's over. But it's sort of like it's like a muscle, isn't it? Like when people say, how do you be confident? How do you be courageous and brave to do hard things? I don't think it's just something that happens to you. It's like going to the gym. There's like little situations that you go through, and you go through it and you go, I ended up on the other side, like a little bit better than I expected. So I can do this again.
Hmm.
So another time this happened to me, not in the same, no more toilets exploded for my secondary crisis, but something that threatened my financial sort of security. But I thought back of sort of those moments and going, I can help myself. And so that became the sort of that new mindset. And I think being abroad and being in a foreign country sometimes trains you in ways that, a place that you're familiar with doesn't, because you are expected to use those muscles. I have to make friends again. I have to be social and make an effort to know people. I have to learn a new language, learn a new culture.
Hmm.
When the Balinese say no or yes, they mean no or maybe, and you have to figure out what that means. You have to figure out all the different nuances of the dance of conversation and exchange to get anything done in that place. And it's hard. but also once you get it, you feel this sense of like, oh, I know how to navigate this world. It's a game I get to play. And as long as I know what the rules are, and that I can create my own rules at times too, there's a freedom to knowing it's a palette that I get to
Hmm.
kind of, or a canvas I get to kind of draw in. And that sort of penetrated in the way that I looked at business as well. That, when I looked at my colleagues and other people, even my own mentors, there's sort of a certain way of a trajectory of a coaching business, right? It's like one-on-one coaching, and then maybe you write a book, and then you have workshops, and then you have group programs, then you have a retreat, and that was sort of the way that built this big empire, have many offers and tons of clients to kind of be viewed as successful. And I did all those things. And 2015, I had my second burnout, which was, making the most revenue ever in my business and having the biggest health scare again, in my world, which made me kind of wake up to like, why am I following this trend of what people say is the successful sort of metric that I'm
Hmm.
meeting, that more is more is better, when actually that's not giving me the life I want to lead. I don't actually want 5 different programs to have to market every year. I kind of just want to have one.
Hmm.
Like, and it was so interesting because when I looked at my personal life, I have been a practicing minimalist for such a long time. By the way, what you see in the back is not my house, so I'm staying at someone's house at the moment. That would not be
Okay,
my
that
back.
was gonna be my next question.
I don't hoard this way. I mean, I have books. I love books, but it's like my house is pretty clean, and I have a very big intention on like when I buy things or introduce stuff to my house. It's sort of needs to serve a purpose,
Hmm.
and so I was such a minimalist, a practicing minimalist in my personal life, but in my business, I was a maximalist. It was like more social channels, more videos everywhere, more team members to manage all the different moving parts of this operation, and I didn't come back to my values of that, what would my business look like if I was to enjoy it and to look at different metrics of success that wasn't just about revenue. I want to make money, but what's
Hmm.
enough money? And then what's also other metrics of success like time,
Hmm.
spaciousness, white
Hmm.
space in my calendar,
Hmm.
afternoons off at certain days to do what I love to do. I didn't incorporate that into the design of my business, which, leads me to nowadays, right? Like you and I were talking about this sort of pre-interview kind of call, was that it's sort of, that experience redefined the way I viewed success in my business and also completely changed the way of how I showed up for my business in things like what I offer, who I take on as clients, what boundaries I have, even with working with clients. I'm an asynchronous kind of girl, don't
Hmm.
really like live stuff. Didn't think I could do that back in the day, that, people wanted live all the time. It's like, no, I don't do that anymore. Don't always do live. And that's just it. You want to work with me, that's the boundary. But we'll still do some great work if you're in for the ride, And so learning how to sort of put my life first and
Hmm.
business second, it has been and still continue to be the lesson I'm learning in my work.
And I think that's so important, and I want to get into a little bit more detail because I think one of the things that we suffer from in the quote unquote West is the feeling that if something's good, more of it must be better.
Mm,
And especially things like money, it's very easy to quantify. So it's very easy to tell if you have more or not. And then a lot of the other things that are as or even more important are often harder to quantify. Like we know it when we have it or when we don't, but it's not like I have X amount of spiritual spaciousness versus Y amount.
right.
And so I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of this thing that I can measure and judge myself on ends up consuming everything else. So how do
Mm,
we go about being more deliberate and intentional about designing our business to support our lives? What should people be thinking about if they're listening to this thinking, gosh, I'd like to do some of that stuff that Lydia talked about? Because you don't necessarily have to move to Bali to do this. You can do this in
no,
your own office right the heck now.
totally.
And Bali may help and may be really fun and all that, but let's let people get started right away.
Mm. Well, the first thing I want to say is that we also don't want to be afraid of money, because I think when I work with certain clients that are like, they'll either be like, I want to make a ton of money, or they feel bad about making money
It's a
as
good
well.
point.
Right. And so we have to kind of understand what's the purpose of money, that every dollar has a purpose, because everything I'm earning and are motivated to earn should equate to an experience I want to have. I'm not just hoarding money in a bank account. Right. And so what am I contributing, what I'm earning towards the future or now, right? Or what are the goals I'm looking to make with this money? And so first of all, is getting clear on the numbers, because this is something that I was so afraid to do. Back in the day, 10 years ago, the reason why I was so much in debt was because I used to, like, not want to face the accountability of what I've been spending on. So when I would pay, the minimum payments or whatever in credit card bills, I would literally like put a hand over the total,
Wow.
just be like, pay minimum. Like, I didn't want to face the consequence of having to have the shame. That's a whole other conversation around shame, but certainly people do that where they're like, I don't even know. I earn some money, it goes out, I have no idea where it goes. Right. So just
Hmm.
even not having that healthy relationship with money, help it confuses things for us, right? Of being afraid of it or not really knowing how to control it and having money control us. So the first part I usually do when I work with my clients is really understand what their enough number is. And what I mean by enough is, what is the amount that you need today, not forever,
Hmm.
because we have different tiers. Like, I work on sort of like what's the good, better, best goals for money, and the good goals is just like paying yourself, right? A living wage that
Hmm.
pays for your life, your rent, your kids, whatever it is that's part of your life, that's non-negotiable. And then once you hit that mark, right, we kind of upgrade ourselves to expanding our goals to maybe the good goal, which includes the renovations I want to do in my office next year, or the bucket list trip I want to take once a
Hmm.
year that I want to keep saving up for every single month for that, and be able to price my offers accordingly so
Hmm.
that I make those goals happen a lot more frequently, right? So even figuring out those numbers, their expenses, what's negotiable, what's non-negotiable, what their lifestyle costs are. Here I am thinking everyone does that because I have to do that to know how I could live there, right? But usually I don't think people do that as often. They don't really know what their lifestyle costs are, and also not quite sure what to eliminate that's
Right.
costing them money that is kind of not essentials either. When I looked at my numbers, I was seeing hundreds of dollars on a bunch of subscriptions and expenses that actually brings no joy to my life, but it's just there because I have automated payments onto it.
Hmm.
So, just being really clear about that money kind of sets the freedom for you to understand what to do with it and how to save and things like that.
So
Um,
you're ahead of Marie Kondo on this again, just like you're ahead of Tim Ferriss, but you're kind of doing a Marie Kondo on your lifestyle, right?
Kind
Not just
of.
on your closet.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that, I'm so glad you brought that up because as I've been doing this for the last decade, it's hard to pinpoint what I did because it's sort of are these micro decisions that you make in that decade. But you're right. It is one of those things where, I did Marie Kondo my life, right? From friendships to what was taking up my energy every single day, what boundaries I have to put on with family members that were naysayers and dream crushers, to even the money, right? Of like, what am I spending on and how can I move that money and the intention for that money towards life goals that I actually really cared about, right? Being debt free was something I cared about, right? So a lot of, I'm been debt free for many years. Everything I buy these days are cash only, no credit cards. That's something of my personal goals that I want to meet, right? So those are the sort of things I had to get the right amounts for, what it costs to build the house in Bali, what it costs for me to travel every year to Europe and Vancouver and live in Bali, what it would cost for me to go do my medical,
Hmm.
VIP mode in Bangkok, right? What is that? It's still a few $1,000s, right? I have to kind of consider. And so being like clear on those numbers really helped me to understand how much I need to make every single year. And also how can I make that money more effectively as well? Not more of it, but
Hmm.
how can I streamline my effort of showing up for my clients or my business, still doing high quality work, but creating systems or, even like eradicating certain things that are taking up time, but actually have no ROI,
Hmm.
in that behavior, right? Just being able to see my business in ways like I take all of December off just to Marie Kondo my business so that when I start the year, I'm not doing a bunch of shit I hate from last year just to continue the madness, right? But to be really honest with myself on what's right for me.
And I want to go, you said a lot of really cool things there, but I want to highlight something in particular, which is sort of knowing what that enough number is lets you back design your business to support that number in a way that lets you run your business and your life the way that's best for you. And I think part of the trap of more is always better is it's really hard to sort of back out and simplify because the
Mm-hmm.
answer is always just do more of everything.
Yeah.
And so knowing that number and then saying, okay, here's how I can do this in 11 months of work a year. Here's how I can do this while still drawing boundaries around my time and calling all the way back to what you're talking about working asynchronously has a kind of thing that a lot of people are going to say, well, my clients will never go for that. And I think one of the important things that we learn as entrepreneurs is it's totally okay for a prospect or the market to say no to us. It's
Hmm.
terrible for us to preemptively say no to ourselves,
So
right?
true.
And there's nothing wrong with saying, "Hey, I would like to work asynchronously. How would that go for you?" Right? And some people might say no, and maybe at the beginning you really need that client and you have to agree or you work out some compromise, but over time you figure out how to get the
Mm,
clients that don't require you to be up in the middle of the night to be
mm.
in the office with them virtually. And I think that's something you said earlier that I meant to highlight and we just got carried away. But two really great tips there. Now, what else do you wish you had known when you started that you maybe help your clients with today that you had to learn the hard way?
I think a lot of it was when I first started Screw the Cubicle, it wasn't a transition business. It wasn't part of my resume, right? It was a brand new industry, brand new niche that I was not confident in right away. And I remember toying with this idea back and forth, like, should it remain to be a blog? Should I try to do something about it? And part of that resistance, if you will, about starting that business was because I thought I needed to be a particular level of an expert
Mm,
to feel worthy to help, you know?
right.
And knowing what I know today, and a big sort of thing I tell my clients is like, we have to kind of redefine even the word expert. If you look at expertise as you are a grade two, teaching a grade one how to go through grade one, you don't need to know grade three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine, 10. You just need to be a real expert in grade one. And there's a lot of people that need you in grade one that actually will never resonate with a grade 10 because
Right.
they're too far up the roadmap
Right.
or
Totally.
whatever it might be. And the way you might navigate them through the roadmap in grade one might be very unique to how you want to do that for them, how you solve that problem, which can bring in some of those values, some of those creativities that only you can do, and that's where to focus on rather than, compare yourself to people who have been in the industry for X amount of years, is comparing apples and oranges. And so that's something I wish I sort of like didn't grapple with for as long as I did,
Hmm.
giving myself that pressure to be like, who am I to do this? I'm not Tony Robbins, I'm not Tim Ferriss, I'm not Marie Forleo, whoever those people at the time. And forgetting that I actually still come with a wealth of experience. I'm not doing anything beyond the scope of work, that back in the day, I didn't teach on business because I hadn't had a successful business yet, but I certainly understood about career transitions. I certainly understood how to be a consultant.
And how to
I could
move to
do that.
Bali and pull it off, right? Like,
Sure. Exactly. Exactly. And so even just like starting with tinier projects, people always think I need like a website, my photography, my social channels, like all that glitz and glamour to feel worthy that you should pay me versus actually like just looking at your network. You don't need a website. Most of my clients get their first paid client without a website
hmm
because what they're going out there to do is they're going to their ecosystem,
hmm
people that you've already built social equity with, that knows you're not a fraud. They've seen you at work, they trust you, and allow them to be part of the journey, to say,
hmm
hey, this is sort of a line of work I'm exploring. Here's why I feel that I'm called to help here. Here are the skill sets I can offer. Will you test something with me? Let me just help for free. And I always call this like a self-made adult internship because we've lost the art of internship. We did that back in the day when we were graduating college and university, but as adults, we're kind of been taught, you better know your way, right? Like you don't do internships anymore. It's embarrassing to do an internship. But I actually think it's some of the most biggest game changers for me to explore a line of work before I go all in with something,
hmm
to just say, do I enjoy it? How would I do that differently? Can I date a few clients in a way of like, actually doing the work with them to see who I like working with, what topics are off boundaries for me, or what I need to work on in terms of a structure or a framework that's going to help my work be better. You're never really going to know these things before you do something about it. So I would actually not spend the money and the time trying to look good
hmm
online with things like websites and branding, and actually just be good at what you do by just helping for free if that's the way to start. Like that's so much more valuable of time spent than glitzing up a website when you're not ready to do that just yet even.
Right. And I think especially if you still have your corporate day job, maybe you haven't even started yet. This is the
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing that you can probably figure out how to pull off. And just in the sense of helping people, whether or not it even turns into your new career, is it something that you enjoy, that gives you meaning, that provides value to somebody else? I think about your story and the Canadians who ran the internet cafe, right?
Right.
Like you didn't need an IT expert. You just needed some people who had been there in grade two because you're in grade one and you need reliable internet. And lo and behold, they're there. They're happy to help. You're happy to pay them for their help, et cetera. And I think that point about the grades is so important because
Mm.
the media gets dominated and the narrative gets dominated by the Einsteins and the graduate professors. And that's fine. Like those people have a lot to offer, but I don't want Einstein teaching me basic math in grade two, right? That's just not going
Right.
to go well for anybody. I need the grade three person who just did grade two and knows how hard it is to go through what is going to be a totally basic thing in a couple of years once you get some experience under your belt.
Oh, I love that you said that because that the people we see out there that's being celebrated, right, and put on a pedestal are these people that are the Elon Musk style of the world, right? So it feels really unreachable. So people tend to get discouraged that unless I'm that caliber, I'm not worthy of being an entrepreneur. And I think the same goes for even business models,
Hmm.
like I chose a tiny business that isn't going to be on Forbes,
Right.
isn't going to be featured in those sort of publications. I know a lot of people who make, let's say, just 100 grand a year continuously, work 20 hours a week, have a great cabin by the lake, they're writing their book on the side, and that's happiness and success for them. But those stories aren't as sexy,
Right.
as the next thing that some billionaire is doing. So we is regular people don't get access to these different examples of what that could look like, how success could look like. And, I'm so glad that we are having more of these conversations so that people can see that, what you want is not that far away from you. And you don't have to kind of sacrifice so much of yourself to reach a goal that isn't even yours to begin with.
I think that's so true. And I think even between like the solo person writing their book by the lake and the billionaires, there's a lot of small businesses who are trying to grow a lot and they're reinvesting their profits in growth and they're hiring and they're promoting themselves on social media, traditional media, et cetera. So even as a small business person, even if you say, well, I don't want to be a Fortune 500 company, but still the narrative is dominated by growth, growth, growth. You have to
Mm-hmm.
grow, you have to grow. And the person sitting by the lake with their fishing pole out, maybe writing some poetry while they're waiting for the fish to nibble, they're not out there promoting this story because they couldn't care less.
That's right.
And so I'm glad you're here. That's why I wanted to have you on because I think you don't have to have a tiny business if you don't want one. If you want to grow, if that fulfills you, great. But if that's not what you need and you would like a
Mm-hmm.
tiny business and you would like your business to work for you instead of the other way around, that's a viable option as well. And if people want to find out more, where can they get in touch with you, Lydia?
The best way is my online home, screwthecubicle.com. There's a ton of free resources right on the homepage. One of the things I recommend if you want to kind of learn a little bit about what I talk about, how I help, is going through my YouTube channel. It's kind of like a little TV show. There's playlists there around career transitions to how do you start a meaningful business that you love and is also profitable, and all the way into like minimalist marketing strategies to solopreneurship strategies. So that's the best place to start. And yeah, there's a quiz on my website as well that the title is, what business should you start based on your personality type, and it sort of helps you to kind of get an idea of like what sorts of options of online businesses are great for introverts, people that do want to do, for example, asynchronous stuff or
Hmm.
behind the scenes and not be front facing constantly. What are the models of work and what offer types are available for that model, so that it gives you some ideas to know that there might be something for you, that is based on in alignment with who you are and what you want in your life versus trying to conform, into a mold that doesn't suit you. Because the worst thing is being an entrepreneur, believing you have the freedom, but then actually trap yourself, into a role that isn't fulfilling. Because then, if not, just go back to corporate because that's much safer to have a
Right.
paycheck. Being an entrepreneur is about that freedom of expression and creative expression. So hopefully that helps to instigate some ideas for people that are wanting to do that too.
Well, Lydia, thanks so much for joining us. Cheers and safe travels.
Cheers. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. Drop an iTunes review or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you've got a friend who would benefit from this episode, let them know about it. If you've got a friend who wouldn't benefit from this episode, but you just haven't talked to for a while, now's a great time to give them a call. Thanks for listening. Until next time.